So, people assume that gender is a strict biological construct that consists of male and female, but actually, from a non-biological, non-subjective view, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, gendery-windery stuff.
To stand up against the poison of white supremacy, as I did my inaugural address, to single out as the most dangerous terrorist threat to our homeland is white supremacy.
The absolute answer that the Russians interfered in our 2016 election. They did so to favor Donald Trump.
Well, police violence is the most tangible expression of systemic racism.
The virus that caused the worst pandemic in a century most likely started in bats.
Speech is violence.
Every government and every individual, to some extent, tells lies. That doesn't mean that they should, but deceit is like showing up late or being messy or driving over the speed limit. It's simply a part of the human condition. But there's something about the lies in modern day American life that are different. Are we too jaded to notice it? I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Welcome everyone, new and old, to Timeless, and to the Julie Hartman YouTube channel, where you can catch Dennis and Julie on Mondays. That premieres at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern. You can watch Timeless Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, also premiering at that same time. And then throughout the week, I post these Julie Noted news videos where I keep you abreast of certain timely developments. So thank you so much for being with us. And I would also like to give a special shout out to those of you who have emailed me at julie@julie-hartman.com. I love hearing from you, and I just want to thank you so much for your words of encouragement, things that you liked, didn't like about the episode. It's really fun to read your notes. We live in a time where it's kind of weird to reach out to people and to talk to strangers. Dennis and I talk about this on our show, Dennis and Julie, a lot, where if a cute guy is walking down the street and sees a cute girl, well, maybe the guy doesn't have to be cute, but if a guy sees a cute girl who he likes, it's sort of seen as creepy or weird for that guy to approach a girl. That's sad. I don't like this direction that our culture is heading in. So I just want you to know that you can always reach out to me and write to me. It is not weird whatsoever. We need to make America a stranger interaction friendly place again. So please do write to me at julie@julie-hartman.com. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Julie R. Hartman. And as a reminder, hit the subscribe button down below so that you can stay notified every time I post a new video. America has never been so divided. That is a phrase that we hear a lot, and people often say that is the one thing that both people on the left and people on the right can agree about. But I actually disagree with the premise of that statement, because there have been many times throughout our history where we have been incredibly divided. And in fact, we have probably been more divided than we are now. For instance, during the founding of our country, there was this war between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, those who wanted to create a more centralized federal government with a Bill of Rights and a constitution that awards the federal government certain powers. And then there were those who said, no, we want a really kind of watered down federal government, and we want the states to have more rights. We even forget that that was a debate, because thank God it was resolved and we got the brilliant American Constitution, which all of us are the beneficiaries of. But still, that was a huge debate 300 years ago that almost ended in the not founding of our country. How about the Civil War? The pro-slavery Confederacy fought against the anti-slavery Union. I would argue that that is more of a divide than the contentious debates that we are engaging in now, as contentious as they are. I mean, there's hardly anything more contentious than the debate over slavery. In the 60s and 70s, during the Vietnam War and the Korean War, there were huge divisions between the isolationists and the interventionists. There was that incident at Kent State University in the 70s where a anti-Vietnam War protester was shot. And that was a huge deal. Up into the present day, obviously there have been differences between liberal and conservative. So I don't think it's exactly right to say that America has never been so divided. That's sort of on the nose, but not quite. I would amend that statement to say that we have never been as divided in the way that we are now. That's different than the principle that we are divided. It's the flavor of that division that I at least think has changed. And the way that it has changed is that now we are debating on issues of reality, issues of truth itself. That is thoroughly different than any other conflict or division that we've ever had in our nation's history. I recently on this show, Timeless with Julie Hartman, did a episode on civilizational values. And I opened it by talking about the 1960 presidential debate between a particularly handsome John F. Kennedy and a less handsome, but perhaps someone who's more aligned with my values, Richard Nixon. This was the first televised presidential debate in our history. By the way, quick historical tidbit that you may find of interest. People who were listening to that debate were sure that Richard Nixon won the debate. But people who were watching were convinced of the opposite. They thought that John F. Kennedy clearly triumphed over his opponent. Why? Because John F. Kennedy on screen was more compelling. He was, as I just said, quite handsome. He seemed to be more at ease than Richard Nixon. Those who were watching noticed that Nixon was sweating and displaying some mannerisms that indicated that he was nervous. And so many say that this debate in 1960, in addition to being historic because it was the first televised presidential debate, also ushered us in to this world that we are clearly in now, where presidential debates are more entertainment than they are actually trying to evaluate a president, a competent leader who is going to influence our future. Anyway, in that civilizational value episode, I opened with talking about the 1960 presidential debate, and I said that what made that debate unique compared to the present moment is that the Democrat on the stage and the Republican on the stage were debating about issues of liberalism versus conservatism. They talked about whether federal workers should or should not be able to unionize. They were specifically focusing on teachers' unions. That's a very characteristic left versus right difference. They were talking about whether we should continue to support the South Vietnamese in their rebellion against the communist North Vietnamese, the typical isolationist versus interventionist debate. That is also characteristically Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative. They were talking about whether to raise taxes or lower taxes. And debates are kind of different now. When you get a Democrat versus Republican, they're actually no longer talking about these liberal or conservative issues. In modern day society, they're talking about these issues of reality. You know, I mean, literally, like reality itself, whether there are two genders. Back in the day, in the 60s, not even 65 years ago, it would have been ludicrous for a Democrat or Republican to even be spending time debating that subject. So in that episode on civilizational values, what I argued is that what used to be the case in America was that both Democrats and Republicans had a core set of values that we subscribe to regardless of our political affiliation. We subscribe to the fact that there is objective reality. We all subscribe to the fact that the United States is a noble and good country that does not have racist origins or overwhelmingly racist origins. We used to all agree that a strong border was necessary in order to secure prosperity and security for our nation. And now you hear people saying that a border wall is a alt-right, super Republican stance. Well, actually, it's not. 60 years ago, it certainly would not have been considered as such. Because even if you look at 2006, Chuck Schumer, Hillary Clinton, then Senator Barack Obama voted for a border wall. It was a mainstream Democrat position that we needed to have borders and enforce those borders in our country. Even abortion restrictions. You know, South Carolina just had this debate that was appealed, and then it was finally confirmed, that restricts abortion up until 6 weeks. So you're allowed to terminate the pregnancy up until that time, but then afterwards you have to carry the baby. That is being considered nowadays as a super conservative position. Abolishing abortion, denying any right to have an abortion, is a conservative position. But putting limits on the time during which a woman can have an abortion, that actually wasn't considered a conservative position until quite recently. Just look at what President Bill Clinton was saying in the 90s: safe, legal, and rare. People used to agree that it was not right to have late-term abortions and that there ought to be certain restrictions. So it just shows you how much has changed. And in my view, the Republican Party has overwhelmingly moved into the space that used to be occupied by these shared values. The Republican Party today, yeah, in some ways it's conservative, but in a lot of ways it's just defending the things that I just mentioned that we used to agree upon, including issues of truth and reality. So today we're going to be talking about that. I'm going to give you many examples of this assault on reality, this assault on truth. Part of the issue with this assault that we're seeing is that we've become so jaded to the amount of deception and lies that are hurled at us on a daily basis that we don't even realize anymore that they're lies. We're going to talk about why it actually matters that we are consuming a cultural diet of deception. We're going to be discussing where this comes from, and then finally, how it may be getting worse, but also a way that we can combat it. So going into these examples, there are different categories of lies that we are seeing in the United States. The first category, and this is kind of the thing that makes all of the other lies possible, is the assault on language. Take, for instance, this idea of gender-affirming care. We hear, people talking about how children, people who are 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, have a right to gender-affirming care if they do not identify with the gender that they were born into. That statement is very Orwellian because it's not gender-affirming. It's actually gender-denying. You are literally denying the gender that you were born into. And certainly when it pertains to people under the age of 18, people who are not legal adults, it's not care, it's abuse. It's people who are taking advantage of those who are vulnerable, those who do not have fully formed brains yet to make informed decisions about their bodies, about things that will permanently alter their lives. And so gender affirming care is nonsense. It's gender denying abuse. Take this debate that we are having now over student loan forgiveness. Even that term is Orwellian and reality denying in its essence. I really did not believe that when I came into my professional life, I would have to explain the objective reality of certain things, but I am pleased to do it for those who do not understand. You cannot forgive money. You can't just wave a magic wand and make money go away. There's no such thing as student loan forgiveness. The more apt name is student loan transference. Perhaps the individuals who are taking out the loan are not the ones who have to pay back the loan. Perhaps they are the ones who are slightly being forgiven. But that money doesn't just disappear. It's going to someone else. And really what's going to happen, and we're already seeing it happening because the Biden administration has forgiven tens of millions of borrowers, is that the taxpayer is going to have to incur that expense. If the Biden administration is allocating all of this money to quote unquote forgive student loans, they're going to need to dip in to a pool of capital in order to do that. And that's you and me. The Inflation Reduction Act is another example. If you read the Inflation Reduction Act, as I have, there actually isn't very much in it, if anything at all, that really addresses the issue of inflation. Inflation is at was about a year ago at a 40-year high. The Inflation Reduction Act is essentially the Green New Deal. But they didn't want to call it the Green New Deal because the Green New Deal is unpopular. If you read the text of that statute, the Inflation Reduction Act, you'll see that a lot of it is providing subsidies to solar companies, for instance, to try to move us towards a green future. You may support that, but I think we can all agree that the Inflation Reduction Act is not a proper name for what is actually happening. This manipulation and corruption of language is kind of universal in regimes that are heading in a more deceptive totalitarian direction. We saw this with the Nazis, we saw this with the Soviet Union, with communist China, and of course, I'm not trying to say that the modern day Democratic Party is as evil as those regimes. Of course not. But I'm trying to draw a historical parallel here to show you how indeed Orwellian and dangerous it is to have these slogans that are totally the photographic negative image of what is really going on. I recently got back from Berlin, Germany. I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Sometimes when you travel, you're so jet lagged, you have no sense of time. I think it was recently that I got back. And I did a show actually here on Timeless called Berlin, which I encourage you all to check out. And anyway, I've become so interested in World War II and Nazi history. I actually just read this book by Bill O'Reilly called Killing the SS, and shout out to someone who emailed me, a listener of Timeless and Dennis and Julie, Tom, for recommending that book to me. I finished that book, and one of the things that I thought was so creepy in that book, something that I learned, was that the Nazis named the roads to the gas chambers in the concentration camps and the cattle cars where Jews were put in to go to the gas chambers. They named those things the road to heaven and the cars to heaven, respectively. That is really sinister. I mean, to say that a road to a gas chamber is a road to heaven, that is an Orwellian statement. Because the people who were going to the gas chamber were not going to a heavenly nice place. They were about to endure hell for 30 minutes, suffocating to death. Now, presumably, and I believe this to be true, that the victims who were taken to the gas chambers would go to heaven upon their death. But to say that they were taken to a kind of heaven at the concentration camp is that weird, sinister, intentional inversion of language that probably these sadistic, evil Nazis got some kind of a kick out of. But it just shows you that these regimes employ this as a strategy. Also, over Auschwitz, which was one of the biggest concentration camps, there was a slogan that read, "Work will make you free." Well, that's the exact opposite of what was going on, because people were going there to work and they weren't free. If they weren't good enough at their work in the eyes of the Nazis, they would be taken to be gassed. And certainly no one, even the most competent worker, was let free from that. If you look at China, I'm going to put up a poster now for those of you who are watching. There were all of these propaganda posters, and one of them reads, "Chairman Mao gives us a happy life." Oh, right, Chairman Mao gives you a happy life. Chairman Mao gave you a miserable life. But again, that inversion of language, the misrepresenting reality, was a tactic to try to pacify the population, to get them on board with certain ideological or practical things that they wanted you to partake in. In addition to these names, which just totally do not represent accurately what's going on, we also see in American life these slogans, which maybe aren't 100% deceptive in the same way as student loan forgiveness or gender-affirming care, but they're trying to lead you in a direction of getting you to agree with a certain political ideology. For instance, pro-choice. It's not a PC thing for me to talk about, but hey, welcome to the show. Pro-choice is actually really not an apt name for what that movement represents. They don't want to call it pro-abortion because that sounds a lot more aggressive to the ear. But again, as unpopular as it is to say, there are a lot of choices that people make up into the point of terminating the pregnancy. Now, of course, that's not the case in terms of a woman who is taken advantage of, a woman who is raped. Of course, they didn't have a choice in becoming pregnant. But a lot of people who engage in sexual activity, they did have a choice to do that or not do that, to use contraception or to not use contraception, to wait until they were maybe in a more committed, formal relationship. So pro-choice, yeah, maybe it's part of what's going on, but it's more so a slogan that's trying to push you in a direction, because no one wants to say that they're anti-choice because it sounds tyrannical. Another example of this is affirmative action. Affirmative action synopsizes about 50% of what's really going on. Indeed, some applicants are being affirmed, but a lot of applicants are being denied. But you don't want to call it, affirmative / denying action. It's much more cool and enticing to call it affirmative action. We see this assault on language as well with the fact that adjectives so rapidly changed their meaning. Take the idea of racist, racism. That definition has totally changed. It used to be agreed on by anyone with a brain, anyone who was reasonable, that there were certain things that were objectively racist, such as calling someone the N-word, that is objectively racist, and then things that are not objectively racist. But now, that adjective, racist, has been so contorted in order to fit certain in vogue political ideologies that it can literally mean anything. You can call a black person articulate, and that, in modern day America, is seen as racist because it's a microaggression, because you are supposedly implying that black people in general are not articulate. So if you're calling someone articulate, you're thinking that it is somehow surprising that they are possessing this ability. That is such BS. That is contrived, made up deceit to push you in a certain political direction. Now we see that, apropos of the Oregon Department of Education, that finding one right answer in math is white supremacy. Apparently, objectivity is racist. Our president of the United States, as you heard in the introduction, says that white supremacy is the biggest threat to the homeland to exist. Well, if you change the definition of white supremacy, and if white supremacy means objectivity, if white supremacy means complimenting a black person, then yeah, it is the biggest threat to our nation because everything around you is allegedly white supremacist. If you look at the Smithsonian Institute, so sad what's happened to so many of these places. I used to love reading books that were affiliated with the Smithsonian, going to some of the museums. The Smithsonian Institute released this poster, which came up with apparent white characteristics. I'm going to put up a picture of it here. Rugged individualism is one of the categories. Self-reliance is apparently a white characteristic. Hard work is apparently a white characteristic. Working before you enjoy yourself, before you play, is also apparently a hallmark of whiteness. Being polite, that's another thing here. I could read you so many more, but you get the idea. The inversion of language and words to manipulate is a new thing that we are seeing in the United States, and it is this tactic to hurl at us these avalanche, this avalanche, I should say, of lies. So there's the language category of lies, but then there are also just plain and simple lies about what happened or what could happen. COVID originated from a wet market was a lie that many of us were told. And if we dared to even question if that was true, if we dared to even say, you know, it actually may have come from a lab, you were censored, kicked off of social media, and called a conspiracy theory right-wing bigot. Donald Trump colluded with the Russians, another lie that was sold to us. And people to this day believe it because the media and the left-wing establishment has not come out and affirmatively, loudly said we were wrong on this. It has been proven through endless investigations that this was not true. Hunter Biden's laptop, we were made to believe that it was Russian disinformation 6 weeks before the election in order to influence the outcome of the election. That was not true. We were made to believe that a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests were, quote, mostly peaceful. That was also not true. 25 people died. Hundreds and hundreds of businesses, primarily black-owned businesses, were destroyed. How about the lie that we always hear, you know, defunding the police and pulling people out of prisons and putting them back into the community is going to lead to unprecedented social cohesion. We're just going to replace those police with mental health officials and everything will be totally fine. How about the fact that masks work? They're highly effective. Or that even the COVID-19 vaccine was highly effective. Let's pause for a moment. Do we even recognize these anymore as lies? We used to live in a country where if a leader told us a lie or people lied, it really meant something. It meant that their reputation maybe wasn't ruined, but was severely harmed and that you ought not to trust that person. But now we are so used to it that we kind of throw our hands up and go, well, everyone lies. So what's another one? Everyone is just participating in this, so whatever. I'm just not going to react appropriately. We have historical lies. Interestingly, most countries, most regimes exaggerate about the grandiosity of their culture. For instance, Hitler talked about the superiority of the Germanic race and how Germany all throughout history has been the power that was the light of the world. In China, literally the name China means Middle Kingdom, and Xi Jinping, as well as preceding Chinese leaders, have distorted that history to make China look like a bigger, more successful, more central power than it actually was. There are so many examples of that. Most regimes exaggerate about the grandiosity. We in the United States exaggerate about the defects of our country. Take the 1619 Project, which won a Pulitzer Prize, started with New York Times writer Nicole Hannah-Jones, and actually 1619 Project materials are being taught in American public schools. That project said that the American Revolution was fought over the preservation of slavery, which is just not true. Certainly there were people in the American Revolution who fought to make the United States, had slaves and were pro-slavery, but the central issue was not over slavery. That was the central issue of the Civil War. The central issue was the tyrannical, overreaching power of the British and the fact that many of these people on a different continent wanted to be free. I mean, there was an article the other day in the New York Times that was called "The Constitution is Broken and Should Not Be Reclaimed." And it was from these Harvard and Yale professors of law who said that the Constitution has these bigoted, horrible origins and that we need to free America from constitutionalism. That is a exaggerating of the failures and the defects of our past. How about what we hear all the time, that America is systemically racist? Do you know what an insult that is? Of course, there was a time during the time of slavery, during the time of Jim Crow, where it was true that systemic racism did exist. The people who were Black were not given the same opportunities as other races in our country. But to say that America right now is systemically racist, really? If you look at Japan, Japan has some of the most strict and stringent immigration laws in the world. That is a systemically xenophobic place, because if you go to that country and you are not ethnically Japanese, you are put at a disadvantage as compared to those who are ethnically Japanese. If you look at the continent of Africa, half of Africa's 54 countries have statutes that criminalize homosexuality. Many of them actually punish it with the death penalty. That is a systemically homophobic place, because embedded in these systems of the country is a prejudice against gay people, criminalizing their activity. So to say that there is a systemic component of racism in the United States, yet another historical lie of us somehow exaggerating the extent that we need to self-flagellate. It's very odd. And then the final category of lies, amid so many, my gosh, that I have just been going on and on about. And by the way, this is the abbreviated version. When I was preparing this episode, I left hundreds of them out. There's the category of personal lies. Think about what we hear. Speak your truth. That's a very common colloquialism here in the United States. That itself indicates the cultural diet, as I like to say, of deception that we have consumed. There's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's your opinion, my opinion, your experience, and my experience. But there is the truth. You cannot make a truth yours or someone else's. It just exists, and you have to appreciate it and follow it. Social media culture, something that is very big in our country, that itself is a kind of lie. It's not as overt as, distorting reality and saying, that X exists when it actually doesn't. But it kind of is. I mean, if you look at people's social media profiles, people love to lie about their lives. They love to make their lives seem happier, richer, more successful than they actually are. We hear people lying about their lives all the time. There's so many people who apply to college and will check a box and say that they're queer or they're Black or they have a, great uncle 5 times removed who may or may not have been Mexican. They use that to get into college. Our president, Joe Biden, constantly tells these personal lies. I was an all-American football player. I almost died in a kitchen fire. Even Donald Trump tells personal lies about the successes of his company and about the amount of people who were apparently present at his January 20th, 2017 inauguration. So all around us, whether it's at a government level, political level, or personal level, we are living in a war on reality and truth. So why is this a big deal? It may seem like a stupid question to even ask, but I actually don't think it is, because in modern America, we don't ask these seemingly obvious questions enough. For instance, why is it important to be a good person? Why is it important to obey the law? People will go, oh, well, the answer to that is obvious. But then you say to them, well, why is it obvious? Tell me what your argument is. And people can't articulate it. We have gotten away from talking about these fundamental principles of good and evil because we think that they are just so established, but clearly they are not, because we are allowing and succumbing to a culture of deceit. So we've got to go back to those quote unquote obvious principles and talk about why they are so good. So why is it such a problem that lies have become rampant? Well, if you look at almost every source of evil, whether it's micro or macro, it comes from some form of deception. Take cheating on a spouse. That's a form of deception. Take being physically abusive to a spouse. That's also a form of deception. A lot of the people who are the recipients of that abuse, maybe they did do something wrong that the other person is mad at, but they did not do what was so terrible as to incur the wrath of that abuser. So we see this on a micro level, but we also see it on a macro level. I go back again. If you look at the most evil regimes throughout history, there is one thing that unifies all of them. They were based on lies. We don't focus on this. We don't acknowledge it or talk about it. When we debate or discuss the Nazis, we go, were they a left-wing regime because they were Nazi or a nationalist socialist, or were they a right-wing regime because they were focused on nationalism? We talk about whether they were left or right. We talk about whether the Soviets or the Chinese were totalitarian or authoritarian or tyrannical. We do these isms and we focus on these names. And we get so in the weeds that we fail to see the big picture, which is that these regimes, more than they were right, left, communist, capitalist, nationalist, not nationalist, they were based on lies. It was a lie that the Jewish people in Germany were these threats to the nation, as Hitler and the Nazis made them out to be. It was a lie that the Aryan Germanic race were somehow superior to other races. It was a lie in Soviet communist Russia or Chinese communist China that workers were going to be protected by the party. They lied about everything. They lied about the amount of grain that was collected. I mean, there was this huge, horrible famine in communist China, which killed about 60 million people in the 50s and 60s. And it was caused because Mao and all of his cronies lied about the grain collection. I could go on and on, even just if you look on a daily basis about the people who were persecuted. They wouldn't have those people go to a fair trial or have their alleged actions that disobeyed the law be under fair scrutiny. If Hitler or Mao or Stalin or any of these leaders didn't like what someone was doing, they could literally pluck them off the street, make up something that they did, have a phony jury to convict them, and then they would be sent off to the gas chambers or the gulag or to the prison. Everything that they did was based on lies. And we live in a country that has been so committed to truth that we don't understand how dangerous lies can be. To this day, you look at the most dictatorial regimes in the world, and their whole shtick is based on lies. Take Iran, which is one of the most misogynistic countries in the world. The age of criminal responsibility for women is much younger than that of men. Women need 2 witnesses in court if they allege that they are raped. 2 male witnesses, actually, in order to corroborate their story. Who has 2 male witnesses when they are being raped? I mean, my gosh. The law is designed to oppress women. In Iran, as well as in Iraq, you are not allowed to pursue an education, to work, unless you get the okay from your husband or your brother. In Iraq, the Taliban in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the Taliban just shut down beauty salons because they don't want women to go out and feel beautiful and embrace their femininity. Those regimes are based on lies. They're based on lies that women are inferior to men and that women need to be pacified and put in their place. Again, we don't get the gravity of lies because we have been the beneficiaries of a culture of truth. What happens though, because it's so interesting to contemplate, how does a place like Nazi Germany, which was clearly just based on so many elements of deception, how does that regime become so popular in mainstream? The answer is that they start with something that is truthful, and then they add the truth is their opening. And then they start building lies on that one truth in order to get power. So in Nazi Germany, they did tell the truth about one thing, and that was that Germany was severely mistreated during World War I. There was that horrible Versailles Treaty, which made Germany have to pay many reparations. There was Article 231, which was the German war guilt clause, which held the German people collectively responsible for the war. The Nazis used that truth, the fact that Germany was abused during the war, to ascend to power. And then from there, they piled on all these lies. Well, it was actually the Jews that brought us into that war. It was actually the Jews that were, influencing that settlement. It is the Jews that are the problems that we are seeing everywhere. So they built on that truth. We saw that in communist regimes. They built on the truth that some laborers are exploited. I mean, that is objectively a reality, that people were subject to terrible working conditions, that they were often taken advantage of by their employer, but then they use that one truth to keep building, putting lies onto it, and becoming powerful. Look at Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter starts with a truth, which is that there is, not rampant, but there is sometimes police brutality. And that sometimes Black people are not treated the same way as white people. But then they use that, and then they put all these lies on it, and they use it to grow in their stature. They start to say that America writ large is systemically racist, and that you need to donate all this money to rectify that problem. And then on the side, they use that money, embezzle it to buy $6 million houses. But they take advantage of the fact that people tend to think in all or nothing terms. They think, well, Black Lives Matter or the Nazis or the Soviets or the Chinese were right about this one thing, so they must be right about all the rest of these things, and they deserve our support. This is part of the insidious strategy with regard to deceit that we better be aware of real fast, or we are going to funnel into something that may be even worse than what we are seeing now. Before we continue, I'd like to quickly tell you about MyPillow. Mike Lindell has a passion to help you get the best sleep of your life. And I have been the beneficiary of MyPillow's products because I use almost all of them. I sleep on MyPillow. I sleep on the Giza Dream bed sheets. I use MyPillow towel sets. I walk into work every day wearing my slippers. And you can get all of these products too at a discount if you use the promo code Hartman, my last name spelled Hartman. For a limited time, you'll get 60% off of the Giza Dream bed sheets that comes with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. You'll receive a set for as low as $39.99 with the promo code Hartman. Also, you will get Mike Lindell's soft cover book free with the promo code Hartman. Just go to mypillow.com and click on the radio listener square or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman. So now that we've established the extent to which our culture has succumbed to deceit and how harmful deception is, let's talk about where this comes from. How did America, which was once a bastion of truth and righteousness, not in every case, and certainly not in every era of our history, but overwhelmingly we have been that shining light on a hill, city upon a hill, as John Winthrop would say, for the rest of the world. So how did we get to this place of being so righteous comparatively to now being one of those only countries, and it's true, we are unique in this, we are one of the only countries who seriously debate about whether there are only two genders? There are a few answers for this. The first is that there is a large fear of people being decapitated. And by decapitated, I don't mean literally a la the French Revolution and the guillotine. I mean canceled. People buy lies in American life because they are so afraid of going against the popular opinion for fear that they may be personally or professionally penalized. And by the way, I get it. I say all the time, I'm really lucky to do this job because I am getting paid to speak the truth. I am getting paid to share my values. A lot of people who are at their jobs do not have that same luxury. However, a lot of people can speak up and choose not to because they just don't want to incur the wrath of those who disagree with them. I think a test of character is whether someone can disagree and stand entirely alone against the people who they used to agree with. When you see someone doing that, you know that that person is principled. And many of us nowadays are cowards, and we just go along with this because we are too afraid. And, we talk all about the past and how evil we were in the United States with slavery and with Jim Crow, and some of that is true. And we talk about how dare these figures not stand up to this evil, and we tear down the statues of these supposed people who were complicit in the awfulness of our country. The people today who judge those in the past so harshly, they won't even stand up to wokeism. They will not even raise their hand and go, actually defunding the police is ridiculous and is going to lead to more harm than good. So are you telling me that those people who will not even stand up to wokeism, how in a culture where it is so easy to stand up to this absurdity, you're telling me that they would have stood up to the evil of the past? It's ridiculous. One of the kind of eerily brilliant things about this whole pronoun debate, if you can even call it a debate, deception that we are in, is that this pronoun stuff is a perpetual litmus test of one's ideological purity. Because literally in everyday life, you cannot get around avoiding a pronoun. And so if you use the right pronoun, by right I mean in conjunction with what the political party in charge wants you to do, then you are seen automatically as in accordance with that worldview. You are seen as ideologically pure. So a lot of people just go along with it because they don't want to be seen as ideologically impure. They don't want to, as I say, incur the wrath. And so we have to acknowledge the amount that cowardice plays in why we have gotten to this place. Just over time, legitimizing lies to keep your own standing. And now we are literally at the height of absurdity. But there's also another thing, which is that in the past, and I mentioned this earlier, telling a lie really used to mean something. It used to be a mark of Cain on your reputation. That if you fooled someone else, you were disrespecting them because you thought that they were too stupid or too ill-informed to buy it. And you were also disrespecting yourself because truth is the essence of who we are. If we are lying about ourselves or lying about things we've done or things we believe, we are committing an offense, not just against the person who we are deceiving, but against the essence of our soul, as corny as it sounds, the essence of who we are. And people used to believe that there was a cosmic consequence to such deception. In addition to it being morally and spiritually wrong, there would also be a way for you to be punished if you didn't do the right thing. And so this is the unfortunate downside of the death of religion, the death of God. People don't believe anymore that there is a judging God that may punish you in the afterlife if you are deceptive. And that has really done a number on our culture because people who may be inclined to lie, people who may be inclined to get away with certain things because they think that someone isn't watching or some system will protect them. The reason why they didn't go ahead and lie in the past was because they believed that there was this cosmic watchdog that would end up having to make them pay a price for their wrongdoings. When you take that away, it trickles down to society because now we think, well, everyone lies. There's no consequence in the afterlife. There's no moral standard that I have an incentive to be beholden to, so I should just lie because it's going to get me ahead. The role of affluence in our country as well cannot be understated. As we have become more affluent, we have become more receptive to these lies. You may be wondering, well, Julie, what the heck are you talking about? I'll point you to a story that someone who grew up on a farm told me. It totally changed the way that I view the in vogue elements of our culture. This guy said to me, he grew up on a farm in Georgia for most of his early life. And he said, when I was young, I, growing up on this farm, understood that honesty was not just something that was virtuous or valuable. It was a necessity of my work. He said, if I went out and, decided to goof off all day and didn't plant the seeds of the crops that I was supposed to plant, in 3 to 4 weeks, it would be very clear that I did not plant the seeds because no crops would grow and I would be punished for that. This person also said to me, if my father asked me at the end of the day if I had closed the chicken coop, I had better tell the truth because the next morning it would be very clear if I had not closed the chicken coop because the door would be open, a dog would come in and eat all the chickens, or the chickens would run away. Again, honesty was not just something that was admirable or virtuous. It was a necessity in order to get by, in order to do your job. That is true of a lot of blue-collar professions, not just working on a farm. You can't BS driving a bus. You can't. You have to do it. And it's clear if you don't do it. You can't BS cleaning up a house, being a housekeeper. There are just some work that are rooted in reality that you literally cannot get around. Of course, there's deception in blue-collar work. And of course, there's honesty in white-collar work. I'm not saying that all white-collar work is intrinsically dishonest. But white-collar work allows you a lot more room for dishonesty than blue-collar work. Because in white-collar work, you can kind of BS your way through it. If you're someone, typing behind a computer, and you can fudge a spreadsheet, and in all likelihood, you will not be found out. In a classroom, if you didn't do the reading, and you're one of those people that goes to college and goes to law school and goes to business school and basically makes it your profession to get certain degrees. If you're in a classroom, you didn't read the book, you can kind of BS your way in talking about certain themes, and it will be very unclear if you didn't read the book. You won't probably be punished for that. A lot of these ideas of defunding the police will lead to goodness, or that white supremacy is objectivity, a lot of these things come up in white-collar environments. They're talked about in classrooms and in boardrooms. So as the United States, as we become, thankfully, more prosperous and more towards white-collar professions and away from the majority of our citizens doing blue-collar professions, we have allowed a culture of deceit to become more common just through our professions. It's also a sign of how great our society is that we even have the luxury to come up with certain lies. Do you think that women, as I said, in Iran, who are facing true misogyny, have the luxury of coming up with these ridiculous things like mansplaining? No, they don't have that luxury. Do you think that Uyghurs who are being massacred in China, or Kurds who are spat on every day in many countries in the Middle East where they are not the ethnic majority, do you think that they have the luxury of coming up with systemic xenophobia and racism and, if someone looks at me the wrong way, they are committing this bigoted act? No, because they know real racism, just as the women in Iran know real patriarchy. Only in a society that is so prosperous, that is so affluent, that is so free, that is so overwhelmingly equal, do we have the luxury to pontificate and come up with these lies and these grievances. So finally, what do we do about it? Something that is exacerbating this problem is the role of technology. Because fundamentally, this war on reality is also a fear of the uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to think about the fact that some students have to take out loans and pay those loans, and they may be worse off for it. That's not fair. All of us can agree. In a perfect world, we would design it that every person, regardless of their socioeconomic background, has equal opportunity to go to university and they don't have to incur this expense. But we can't remake reality. We can't just say, oh, poof, like a magic wand, all of these loans can be forgiven. We can't do that. That's not the world that we live in. But we fear reality so much that we are, at least in the meantime, acting like we can do that. It's uncomfortable to acknowledge that some people have to go to prison because they have done things that are wrong. And it's complicated because some people who do commit crimes may have come from really terrible backgrounds that may have made them more likely to commit those crimes and push them to be in those situations. Yes, it's nuanced, it's uncomfortable, it's tragic, but the answer isn't going in this make-believe direction where we should just de-incarcerate people and expect us all to hold hands and jump through daisy fields. This war on reality is a discomfort with being uncomfortable. And sadly, technology is allowing us to continue to occupy that space. Because think about it, if you're uncomfortable in your daily life, there's a lot that you can do to kind of remake your reality in a more favorable way. If you don't want to go out and buy food, order Uber Eats. It'll be right at your door. If you don't want to go to work one morning, call your boss and go, I'm going to log on Zoom today and stay in my pajamas. You can do that. You know, if you don't want to build that new console that you bought, you can go online and pay some TaskRabbit $50 to do it for you. One of the great things about the modern world is that things have become really easy. But technology has created this sense that in every way possible, we can remake reality to avoid discomfort, and that is not true. Look at virtual reality headsets. We are now in a world where you can literally put on a headset and remake your entire reality to be whatever you want. That is harmful because it is moving us away from real reality. And one day you're going to have to take off those virtual reality headsets and actually interact in the world. And you are worse off if you think that you can just avoid discomfort at all costs. I think we need to be aware of this role of technology. We've got to get away from it. We've got to realize the effect that it's having on our psyche. And we have to remember that even the smallest lie can lead to something greater. It can build and build and build, as we saw in these aforementioned dictatorial regimes, and turn into something that we can't control. So finally, I'll point you to this great essay by Alexander Solzhenitsyn called Live Not by Lies. History shows us the destructiveness of deceit, but it also shows us its remedy. In that even in a small way, if we can't stand up to lies, if you're in a profession where you will literally lose your job if you dare to say that there are only two genders, there is a way that you can combat deception, and that is by just remaining silent. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was someone who lived in the Soviet Union. He was the victim of the atrocities of the Soviets. He was actually put in in the worker camps, and he talked about how to combat these lies. And he said, quote, "A universal spiritual death has touched us all. We lie to ourselves to preserve our peace of mind. Is there really no way out? Is there only one thing left to do, to wait without taking action? Maybe something will happen by itself, but it will never happen as long as we daily acknowledge, extol, and strengthen, and do not sever ourselves from the most perceptible of its aspects, lies." And he has this call to action where he says, in our timidity, let us make a choice, whether to remain consciously a servant of falsehood, or to shrug off the lies and become an honest man worthy of respect. From this day onward, we will not sign, write, or print in any way a single phrase which distorts the truth. We will not utter such a phrase neither in private conversation or in public. We will not depict, foster, or broadcast a single idea which has the distortion of the truth. We will not attend any demonstrations or meetings if they are contrary to what we know to be true. Yes, if we can't go out and actively fight this deception, the very least that we can do is not repeat it, not attend, and just sometimes remain silent. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. As a reminder, hit the subscribe button down below if you'd like to stay notified for all of the videos that I post. Take care, and I'll see you soon.